Welcome, everybody. I'm really looking forward to this webinar. It's a joint project with ISSM and SMSNA. We're going to be talking about social media influence on sex medicine, friend or foe. I think this is a fantastic lineup that we have set up for tonight, and it's really exciting that we're able to do these sort of programs that really initiated around the time of COVID, and certainly they've been a huge success. Next slide, please. My name is Jerry Brock, and after I finish off a brief introduction, the president of SMSNA, Dr. Khera, will take it from here. But for those of you who are looking from different parts of the world or are looking for translation, one of the new wrinkles that we've added is now the ability for you to actually look at subtitles that are including translation. And in order to do that, all you do is you can turn it on or turn it off at your convenience. You just select the language of your choice with your own screen. To do so, at the bottom of the screen, next to the chat and question and answer function, you'll see a third button that says Show Captions. So you just have to click on that button and select the language of your choice, and that'll enable subtitles and translations for you. Next slide, please. You know, the ability for us to share information virtually across the globe is so incredibly important. And the vision of ISSM is, of course, that we think every human being has the right to a healthy and satisfactory sexual life. The mission and purpose of ISSM, and Mo will talk about SMSNA specifically, is really for us to become the most respected and trusted source for information, education, and professional development in the field of human sexual health. This program is one aspect of how we achieve that. And of course, we also have world-class publications, meetings in which we highlight some of the research activities that are going on around the world. We have both in-person, online opportunities for knowledge exchange and meeting other colleagues from around the world who are doing research in areas and clinical practice in areas that may align with yours or may be completely complementary that you weren't even aware of. We've been around since 1978, and we've now actually have worldwide exposure with various affiliate organizations. Tonight's program is with SMSNA. The next program in July will be with SLAMS in South America. Of course, we have a close relationship with the Europeans, with the Middle East, with South Asia, and a new developing group, in addition to the Asia Pacific, is the African Society. So it really truly is a global group of interested professionals. In addition, of course, we have ISSWISH, that's a group that we collaborate with, but is not an affiliated society. Most of you are familiar with this, but in case you're not, you know, we have a whole enterprise here of journals. The publication family that we have is both original research in a JSM, we have a review journal, we have open access, and a video journal that really looks at various sexual medicine surgical procedures and provides a really nice way for residents, for early clinicians, and even those that are very experienced to learn and see how various surgical interventions are done. A huge resource across a variety of different platforms. I'll finish off with just reminding everybody that we have an absolutely fantastic meeting that's going to be happening in September 26th to 29th in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The program looks amazing. The hotel is right on the beach, and I can tell you that we've had a wonderful time working with our SLAM colleagues to put this together, create a wonderful social and scientific program, and I hope all of you can come. So with that, in my role as president of ISSM, I'm going to pass the next baton down to Mo Khera, who's president of SMSNA, to take it from here. Mo, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome everyone. And my name is Mo Khera, president of the SMSNA. And on behalf of the SMSNA, I want to welcome everyone to this wonderful webinar on sexual medicine and social media. So we, the SMSNA, as Dr. Brock had mentioned, are an affiliate member of the ISSM. And we have for many years have enjoyed this collaboration with the ISSM And this evening, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background of who and what the SMSNA is and does. So our objective is really to promote, encourage, and support the highest standards of practice in research, in education, and ethics in sexual dysfunction. We are a multidisciplinary organization, 1,400 members strong, and we're made up of physicians, APPs, medical students, social workers, and mental health professionals as well. Next slide, please. So what do? There's 4 main areas. We really like to identify existing and emerging issues in the field of sexual medicine and dysfunction. We like to provide a forum for free exchange of discussion of new ideas, thoughts, and concepts. We like to develop standards and guidelines for sexual medicine research and practice. And finally, we like to bring leading edge concepts of research, clinical practice, ethics, and politics to healthcare practice and those interested in sexual medicine and sexual health. Next slide, please. So if you want to join the SMSNA, it's very easy. Please look at this website at smsna.org/members to join. There are many benefits to join our society. There's a reduced member meeting registration fees. You get access to the discussion forum and job posting. You can list jobs for healthcare providers. You're eligible to receive SMSNA fellowship programs and grants, survey dissemination, and more. And don't forget that medical students and residents are able to join for free. Next slide, please. And I'd like to invite everyone to join us this year to our fall scientific meeting. This year, we'll have it October 17th to the 20th in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's a beautiful venue. We have many new ideas and forums that are going to be presented this year. We're going to have a large section on a Spanish-speaking program as well in Spanish abstracts. And so really, we really want to invite all of you to come join us at this wonderful, wonderful meeting. Next slide, please. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderators, Dr. Andino and Dr. Lopes. Please, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khera. And thank you all for the opportunity for the two of us, for me to be sitting here virtually next to my colleague, Dr. Leonardo Lopes, and to serve as moderators. We're really excited. We have a great lineup. A very quick housekeeping comment. Please, you'll notice at the bottom of our Zoom box here that there's both a chat and a Q&A feature. And as you listen to the next talks, we're really going to focus on introducing the speakers, allowing them to give their presentation, and introduce them one by one in case people join at different times. As questions come up, don't wait until the Q&A session at the very end, least you forget. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature. Sometimes the chat, people are saying hi to each other, saying, you know, great talk. It's harder to keep track of the questions. So really encourage everybody to focus on the Q&A.
So it will be nice with you. Thanks for having me here. And we are waiting for these 3 most of famous speakers we have here from the social media and have such a good time. And as Andino said, we have to stimulate you to do the Q&A for questions and answers after that. So Andino, you can start it.
Absolutely. And here's just a quick overview of the program. Like we mentioned, we're going to go through the speakers one by one, but we're going to have a couple different talks: the digital diaspora, social media, where sex is bad and haters know best, and then finishing with addressing non-healthcare influencers on social media. And then the Q&A will really allow us all to talk about these different talks. How do they relate to each other, and what questions do you, the audience, have, as well as some questions that we'll ask the speaker. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sonia Balani. Dr. Balani completed her residency in OBGYN at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell Medical Center. Dr. Balani has a really interesting background. She pursued a fellowship in urology after that. She worked with pioneers in pelvic pain. And so she has training in both the OBGYN and the urology world, which really gives her a unique perspective and a comprehensive foundation that has allowed her to kind of focus her interest in the sexual medicine realm. And so please, Dr. Balani, it's a pleasure to have you here tonight. Go right ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Sonia Balani, and I'm a New York City-based pelvic and sexual health specialist. So the title of my talk today is, as as Dr. Andino said, is the digital diaspora of medicine, cultural discrepancies and barriers in sexual medicine. And it's actually a topic that I find so interesting and near and dear to my heart because social media is something that's been around for a while now. It's something that's not going anywhere. And understanding how to properly utilize these tools to collaborate and to have voices in the field is super important. So thank you for having me. Next slide. Thank you. Disclosures, I'm a sexual health advisor for Astroglide, but that in no way will affect or impact our talk today. Next slide. Thank you. So why social media? I have been on social media now for about 9 years. And when I first started my social media presence, I can say I was probably one of the few physicians on social media at that time. It wasn't something that was really respected. In fact, it was sometimes mocked. But now we see that social media is here to stay. It's a way that we communicate with our patients. It's a way that we communicate with our peers, and it's not going anywhere. So how can we utilize these tools, especially in the field of sexual health, which is often stigmatized? My talk today is really going to focus on various cultural barriers that we have and how we can approach them. Next slide, please. So sexual health on social media. It's so interesting, right? What are the 3 things your mom always tells you to never talk about at the dinner table? Sex, politics, and religion. And what are we here talking about on social media to enable our voices to be heard? Sex. And it's oftentimes stigmatized and it's oftentimes censored. And so we have to know how to utilize these platforms in order to be able to make a statement. Next slide. So there are certain specific considerations we need to take into account. 1 is government regulations. 2 is technological infrastructure. 3 is cultural norms, and 4 is economic conditions. You're going to see how all of these interplay together in order to create a landscape for social media that can sometimes either be your friend or your foe. Next slide, please. So government regulations are super important because depending on where you are geographically really impacts what certain platforms you use. So, here in the US, we oftentimes use platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn. In places like China, platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are actually blocked. So if you were trying to access that audience, the platforms that you're using in your specific cultural region may not apply. In Europe, there's tons of regulations in terms of rules about sensitive topics and censorship, which also can sometimes make it a little bit more difficult to talk about sexual health topics. In the United States, we do always talk about the First Amendment and how it protects the freedom of speech, but oftentimes there have been ongoing discussions more recently about the extent to which social media platforms should be regulated. There's certain laws that have even been passed about TikTok. So how do we navigate this in the field today? Next slide, please. Utilizing the appropriate platforms is key. So what I mean by that is this. For example, in mainland China, as opposed to Hong Kong, which is a little bit different, you would be using different platforms like WeChat or Weibo. But in places like Hong Kong or the USA or even Europe, many people are using things like Facebook, Instagram to try to get their messages across. Taking advantage of platform features is super duper important. So you're creating a community in your social media, a community that wants to know your opinions on topics, that wants to know data, that wants to understand and educate themselves. And so utilizing features like stories on Instagram or certain visual images on TikTok is really important to be able to utilize, especially in sexual health, to get your point across. Next slide, please. Thank you. And as I say that, words matter. They really do matter. What happens when words are censored? So, it's so funny because as educators, whether that's clinicians, providers, researchers, we are often taught to use anatomically correct words. But what if those words are actually censored on social media? Because in fact, they almost always are. So even words like sex are censored on social media. If you were to put that on Instagram, you are not going to be shown on their algorithm. So your voice now that you're trying to amplify, your message that you're trying to get across, the information and education that you want to pass on to someone is being suppressed. So, it's this interesting conundrum I find because it's a catch-22. You want to be able to end the stigmatization of these disorders. But then in order to do so, you're having to use euphemisms and words like, for example, in the USA, we have to use words like SEGGS instead of writing sex on your social media platform, wherever you are, just to be able to get your point across. But then you're ultimately adding to the stigmatization of these disorders when you're not able to speak freely. But it's an important point to take into account as you're utilizing social media as a tool, because it can either backfire or it can help catapult you forward. Technological infrastructure. This is probably one of the most interesting aspects of social media, and it's one that we often don't really think about on a day-to-day basis. And that's because technological infrastructure actually determines access to social media. So in areas with widespread high-speed internet access and broadband data, you see higher social media usage. You see faster connections, you have smoother experiences, you have video streaming, real-time communication. And in these areas, you actually see social media utilized for not just education and disseminating of information, but for consumerism, for booking appointments, for contacting other people. And so understanding your target audience and who you're trying to communicate with is really important. And the technological infrastructure actually determines that. In countries that don't have so much access to social media, you have to really remember that the social media in those areas are actually utilized oftentimes more for education purposes, which is a little bit different. Next slide. Economic conditions. This all plays a role. So technological infrastructure and economic conditions really go hand in hand, in the sense that government policies that promote technological infrastructure development can boost overall social media penetration and usage. And that's how we use social media to communicate. It's interesting because in more, I guess, what you would say countries with higher incomes, higher disposable incomes, they have greater access to smartphones, internet service, and that leads to higher social media adoption rates. But in this area, social media can often be used for e-commerce, advertising, shopping. But in lower income countries, then the cost for these devices and plans can limit access. Social media can almost be more utilitarian in a sense, focusing on communication of information rather than entertainment. And oftentimes in certain countries, there are smaller platforms that are not global that are utilized for specific linguistic and cultural needs. Next slide, please. Cultural norms and practices. I dislike when I have wordy slides, but at the same time, I felt that there was so much good information that kind of needed to be said, and I wanted a succinct way to say it. And in that sense, one of the most interesting aspects of social media is how we use it culturally. So in the US, we have this whole phenomenon that's known as the influencer culture, meaning we have people that live their everyday lives and they affect trends, consumer behavior. And it's interesting because as educators, physicians, just social workers, anyone on social media who's disseminating educational content, you are often placed in the same category as an influencer, even though you might not feel that way. But doctors and social workers and NPs, and we are all probably the original influencers because we influence people's health. But ultimately, it's just a phenomenon that we have to take into account when we are posting things on social media, because people will buy certain products that you recommend, or they will go to certain people that you say, or you think are good. This can be very different in South Asia and East Asia, where there's more of a community value, more collective interests. It's more of group activities, communal sharing, and oftentimes there's a different respect for social norms and authorities, and sometimes this can actually lead to more censoring of sexual health information. And then in Middle Eastern countries, social media content tends to be more conservative. They really adhere to cultural and religious norms. Platforms like Instagram and Snapchat are popular there, but the content is often filtered to avoid cultural taboos. Next slide, please. So given all of this and where we are now, how do we navigate this? How do we take all of these different factors and create a social media existence, whether that's on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or all of the above, that actually is aligned with what we're trying to do, with how we're trying to educate? Well, the first and biggest thing that you can do is familiarize yourself with the laws and regulations regarding sexual health content in each target country. Some countries have strict censorship laws and regulations, others don't. Adjusting language, imagery, and topics to comply with these regulations is super important. Like, for example, in certain countries, explicit content can sometimes be banned. So creators do have to use euphemistic language, focus on general health or well-being. And all in all, be aware of cultural attitudes towards sexuality, gender roles, related topics. Some cultures do have taboos or sensitivities around discussing sexual health openly. And in order to be able to connect or collaborate with people in your community, you have to respect that. Tailoring messages to align with cultural values is key as well. Next slide, please. And, it's really important to educate and collaborate. That's what we're all here for. I mean, I think everyone can agree that that's often our most important, what we can add most to with social media. But focusing on providing factual, educational content that addresses common questions and concerns is super important. Emphasizing harm reduction strategies such as safe sex practices, and really collaborating with locals. So I really love to collaborate with people within the field because we grow together and we educate together. And ultimately, that not only helps your voice, but helps everyone else's voice as well. Next slide, please. And tips and tricks. Although I will say I am guilty for not consistently updating or engaging. Oftentimes when you're in the trenches and seeing patients day in and day out and doing procedures and in the OR, it can be really hard to keep up. But, that's one thing that's super important in building your community is keeping content updated, relevant, using polls, interacting, having Q&A sessions, just engaging everyone within your community. Obviously, avoiding the spread of misinformation. When you go on social media, and I'm sure we will get into this further on in the talk, everyone's an expert. Everyone's an expert, whether they're wherever they come from. And so how do you delineate the information that you're spreading? I mean, making sure that you're not spreading misinformation is really key, using evidence-based sources. And, cancel culture and mob mentality can be a really tough thing on social media. So, it's important to avoid any type of coercion or pressure in that way. Next slide, please. So, the take-home point for me would be that by considering these strategies, sexual health creators in any form effectively navigate these landscapes across different countries and cultures, making their content more impactful and respectful, and just in general, improving cultural competence to reduce disparities for sexual health. Thank you.
Sonia, it was such a great overview about many issues in social media that probably we can discuss after that. And remember the audience about the Q&A button here. You can send us questions, will be discussed later. So to keep moving, we are now having Dave DeLay. David is a board-certified clinical psychologist, sex therapist in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he is frequently has contributed to research about sexuality, mental health, clinical practice, and substance use treatment. David, we have a talk now about social media, where sex is bad and haters know best. David, thank you very much. It's all yours.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Prestigious group. I'm really honored to have the chance to share. It's fascinating to me. Each of us developed our presentations independently, but it is so interesting to me to see the overlap. It's very affirming to me when I hear folks like Dr. Balani talk about some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to be talking about some of the stuff that Dr. Milhouse is going to be talking about. And there is so much consistency in this that I think it is affirmative and offers some consensus for all of you. Next slide. So social media has been really since inception a haven for folks with sexual interests that they were unlikely or reluctant to share in their local communities or with their local families. Even, early bulletin boards, AOL groups, AOL, gosh, I can't even say it, MySpace. These were all havens for discussions of things like swinging, alternative sexuality, when people couldn't be out in their communities. Online groups were places where sexual diversity was welcome and safe. As I like to say often in my trainings, that if you were the one person who found Big Bird in Sesame Street really, really sexy, you thought Big Bird was smoking hot, you could find somebody else online who shared your interest. You probably couldn't find somebody in your small town that shared that interest, but if you got online, you could very quickly find somebody else that also thought Big Bird was really sexy. And that helped you to not feel alone. It helped you to break down some of that external social message that there's something wrong with you because your sexual interests are not shared, at least publicly, by the large group around you. It also increased people's willingness to now be out as they practiced being out about their sexuality online and social media. We then saw people becoming more comfortable and more confident to express their sexual selves publicly, regardless of social stigma or public judging of their sexuality. Social media is still the #1 source for sexual information for young people, tied with friends. Now, although pornography is very commonly identified as a lead sex education source for young people, social media out-trumps it consistently. Next slide. Not saying that sexual health information is necessarily healthy or positive or information that we want folks sharing. Unfortunately, because of the algorithms, because of the clicks, social media information about sexual behaviors encourages risky behavior. My colleague Debbie Herbenek at Kinsey in Indiana has published some really remarkable research recently around the prevalence and increase of choking during sex in young people. And one of the fascinating things that she found was that while boys and young males are more likely to report encountering ideas of choking during sex from pornography, females are more likely to report hearing about choking in memes shared online, such as these, that encourage and incentivize risky sexual behavior. And because they get the clicks, because they get the sensational response, they get shared more on social media, encouraging more risky sexual behavior amongst viewers. Next slide. As Dr. Bellani mentioned, one of the really challenging things for many of us that are online talking about sexuality is the censorship. Very explicit censorship of words related to sex. And I will say what is fascinating to me, and I'm fairly prominent on social media talking about sexuality, challenging some myths around sexuality and pornography especially. But what's interesting is that I have seen an extraordinary level of misogyny in the censorship that occurs. It is my very strong belief that female professionals on social media that are talking about sexual health are much more likely to be censored than are males. It's interesting. Many female colleagues report to me that they have been, quote, shadow banned on social media for many years, where their information, their content is not shared in the algorithm and is suppressed because they are talking openly about sexuality. And interestingly, though I've been on social media now for many years, I've never experienced that. So for whatever reason, there is some significant kind of social stigma, both towards sexuality in general, but particularly towards female sexual health, that is intruding into censorship and suppression of these online discussions. It makes it difficult to do what I'm going to get to in a minute, which is encourage you to get out there and share the information. Because when you get out there and share the information, if you're challenging some of these social narratives that I'll talk about here in a moment, you are more likely to then be censored and suppressed and silenced. Next slide. This is from a really interesting recent article where they were talking about NGOs, non-governmental organizations, being banned for talking about sexual health on social media. As Dr. Bolani mentioned, many people will use code with eggplants or peaches or bananas instead of referencing genitalia. But it turns out that the algorithms are already onto you. Changing the word sex to segs, the algorithms are already onto you. They know you're talking about sex. They've already updated those filters to catch you still. In this really challenging issue, they identified that simply talking about self-managing an abortion led to their content being identified as harmful and dangerous, taken down, and then the next day, or that same day, they were actually taken off social media entirely on YouTube. So we can understand how in some countries or some regions where sexual health, reproductive medicine is restricted by law, that in those areas that censorship, could have some local legitimacy, at least, given those laws. Here's the problem, is that the most conservative areas are having the greatest impact worldwide, because those most conservative rules and guidelines are getting imposed across the spectrum on social media. Next slide. But if you are online talking about how bad sex is and how scary sex is, then there's no problem. You don't get censored at all. It is extraordinary to me if you are out there, if you go on social media and, for instance, like I do, talk about how pornography use can potentially be healthy for people, can improve their sexual lives, can increase sexual novelty seeking, can increase sexual frequency within a relationship. You will be inundated with hate, and oftentimes those posts will be censored or suppressed. But if you are using those same words, if you are talking about pornography, but identifying it as bad, as evil, as dangerous, as immoral, as damaging to marriages, there's no censorship at all. So it's fascinating that the algorithms are apparently pretty good at picking up if you are being positive about sex, and they want to suppress that. But if you are supporting the narrative that sex is bad, scary, and dangerous, there's no censorship at all, which is scary. I will say, and this leads into the next section, that overwhelmingly many of the people that are talking about sex online are coming, sexual health and sexuality online, are coming from a non-professional background. They are oftentimes coming from a moral and a religious background. And what's interesting is that very few of them have a legitimate professional identity, even though they tell you they do. And it was fascinating to me when I was looking for pictures for this presentation, and I ran across this slide here on the right with Dr. Trish Lee. So she is a physical therapist in North Carolina who is not currently licensed, but she is a very significant YouTube influencer talking about the dangers of pornography and pornography addiction. She claims to use neurological kind of reprogramming training and such to help people overcome pornography addiction. She was for a good long while out there claiming that she was a professor at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that she was faculty, that she had done research on pornography and pornography addiction. Some colleagues and I dug into her history and proved that all of those were All of those were lies. Next slide. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are exaggerating their knowledge and influence on all of these issues. My colleague, Justin Dubin, published this amazing article on semen retention. For men, some of the biggest sexual health information that is out there is about semen retention and penis enlargement. It is extraordinary to me that, and I had to look at that number a couple of times. Semen retention had 1,216,000,000 impressions on TikTok. There's nothing new about semen retention. I mean, Samuel Tissot was talking about it in 1600s. It is hot now because it is old. It is old information now repackaged online. And only 11% of the material discussed online about semen retention was created by physicians. So 89%, I think I'm doing that math right, 89% of what is out there about male sexual health, about a very significant topic around male sexual health, is being promoted by, as Dr. Bellani mentioned, influencers that use fear and anxiety to manipulate you. I believe that social media is best characterized as the anxiety industry, because by making you nervous, particularly about sexuality and about your masculinity or your sexual capacity, they can make you nervous and then make you click on the things they want you to click on. So click on the next slide, please. We did a nice study, my colleague Dr. Prowsey and I, on another unique social media subgroup on Reddit that related to the semen retention folks. These are no-fappers. No-fappers are folks who try to refrain from masturbation. And they claim that they are not anti-pornography, that they are just anti-masturbation, that they believe they can be better men by not masturbating. However, what we found was that this is a unique forum that is filled with frightening and very troubling levels of violence, misogyny, anti-Semitism, every conspiracy theory you can imagine there. What is really interesting, though, and again, this kind of gets back to something Dr. Bellani mentioned, is that the more sensational, the more ugly the information, the more clicks it gets, the more likes it gets, the more popular it gets, the more, and it creates this circular spiral, so that it encourages and incentivizes people to be defamatory, encouraging violence, encouraging statements like pornographers should be executed, or women should be raped. If a woman is sexy and tempts you to masturbate, that she should be killed for encouraging those thoughts or temptations in you. The reason I bring this up is that there are clinicians around the world that I'm aware of that are encouraging young men who don't want to masturbate to go onto the NoFap site and groups as a way to try to sustain abstinence from masturbation. If you are one of those clinicians, I strongly encourage you to reconsider, because you are sending your patients into frightening, dangerous areas with extremely unhealthy, violent social structure. On to the next slide. So what to do? One, talk to your patients. Ask them what they're looking at, what they're reading, where are they getting their information. Ask them if they're looking at social media, if they're getting information about sexual health there, and then ask them to ask you questions about the material that they're seeing. I can't emphasize this enough. Talk to your colleagues about the importance of social media. Dr. Bellani mentioned that she had been mocked by colleagues for being on social media. And I sit on the board of psychology for New Mexico. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board right now. But one of the things that boards of psychology and medicine across the United States are seeing is an incredible rise in board-related complaints related to social media. Unfortunately, those of us who choose to be on social media, it is being weaponized against us to silence or suppress our speech. I'm also seeing older colleagues, and I don't mean to generation shame you, but older colleagues that don't understand the value of being on social media and encourage younger clinicians to just not be on social media, you are not helping. And in fact, you're making it worse, because if we're not there, the space gets filled with these non-professional folks with violent, scary, mythical kind of thinking. We have to acknowledge the need for our profession to change, our culture to change, and our industry to change. Follow reputable sources, share them. Encourage colleague Justin Dubin is on TikTok and Instagram and is killing it, combating the semen retention folks. We need more folks like that out there, and like you, encouraging accurate information to be shared. Thank you.
Wonderful. And a round of applause here. One more introduction, folks. And again, thank you. I see some people have used the Q&A, so a few questions to start our discussion off after this last talk. Dr. Fenwa Millhouse, it's a pleasure to introduce you today. Dr. Millhouse is a board-certified urologist, fellowship-trained subspecialist in female pelvic medicine and reconstructive surgery. She previously worked for the largest private practice in the state of Illinois as the leading pelvic floor surgeon. But now she's currently the co-founder and co-owner of Down There Urology in Chicago, a specialized urology clinic focused on sexual dysfunction, hormone therapy, and cosmetic general enhancement. And today she's going to be talking to us about addressing non-healthcare influencers on social media. So you can really see how all these talks are melding together. Take it away.
Thank you. I want to thank the ISSM and SMSNA for allowing me to be a part of this interesting and necessary discussion on social media. Thank you all for sharing your evening. So with that, next slide, please. And I will be building on some of the stuff already presented by my colleagues, Dr. Balani and Dr. Lay. But as you all are obviously aware, social media is pervasive and is here to stay. About 8 million humans worldwide, almost half are using social media, 3.5 billion users around the world. This is probably an old, outdated citation here. And on average, we utilize social media about 2 hours and 20 minutes per day. And guess what? We are a large part of social media users are using it for health-related topics, whether intentionally or kind of through the algorithm, it's coming through them, 80%. And so it makes next slide, please. It makes complete sense that we have to be in this space as evidence-based clinicians. I thought this graphic was cute and funny, the Gen Zers DIY healthcare system. And I have 2 Gen Zer kids, and I completely agree with this graphic. And this extends to even millennials as well. And we know this is just going to continue to grow, but we know that about 60%, it's estimated about 60% of people use social media for their health information. It in a lot of cases leads to patient empowerment. It has been shown to lead to patient empowerment and increased patient engagement, which is great. That's the kind of friend side of it, and the bonus side of it. And we'll talk a little bit about the bad side of it. And 70% of healthcare consumers trust health information shared by their peers on social media. And so when a peer shares some sort of health information, 70% of their followers, if you will, trust that information. This is from Pew Research Center. Next slide, please. And so the bad side of it, which is very apparent, is that there's a lot of misinformation or lack of information, which is abundant. We've always known that this is abundant. We hate when patients say that they Googled something, and now, things like TikTok have replaced Google, especially for Gen Zers, for younger generations. And this can lead to a bunch of medical fake news. In some cases, this was a TikToker or social media person who ended up in the hospital listening to a wellness influencer. And the word influencer has a kind of negative connotation in medicine, but I want us to be the positive side of influencing. Next slide. And in fact, our colleagues in Europe published misinformation and how widespread it is within urology, in the European urology. And we know this impacts all parts of our field, especially as we can imagine sexual medicine, which is already, a taboo topic, ripe with lack of information and misinformation. Next slide. So what do we do about this? How do we engage? How do we participate in this space that is filled with, as my colleague Dr. Lay pointed out, with largely non-medical or potential pseudoscience influencers? We, as evidence-based clinicians, researchers, need to do a better job of infiltrating this space, of being consistent. I love that in this men's health clip on the top left, they kind of rated the top influencers men should be following when it relates to sexual health. And we see one of our own, Dr. Rena Malik, is among them. We do see that, I don't know if you guys are familiar, I'm sure you are in this audience, with Andrew Huberman, who is a PhD neuroscientist, but has come under some rightful scrutiny and not controversy, but scrutiny, because of a lot of his content seems to be ripe with not pseudoscience and not well documented evidence-based medicine and endorsement of a variety of healthcare of medical supplements. And so I want to see us take more of this space. It's even in the world of female sexual health, mostly non-physicians take up this space. And this reflects the lack of attention that medicine itself has really given when it comes to women's sexual health. We know this well. I know I'm not speaking to a lot of us here in this audience, members of ISSM and SMSNA and ISSWISH, but most sex educators and influencers for women on social media are not medical. There is a great proportion that are sex educators, and sex educators have a variety of backgrounds, some of which are more traditionally licensed and others which are not, and just coming from their own experiences. And so this is what our patients are getting. Next slide. So I think as we create our own space for those of us that have already started to be on social media, and those of us that I'm hoping will enter the space, we want to collaborate with even with both healthcare professionals and non-healthcare professionals that can enhance our message. And one smart thing is, where are your target audience? Where are they going to? And seeing who are they already following? And if those accounts share your common mission, whether it's empowering women to know their bodies and to claim and to be have ownership in their own orgasm, whether it's empowering men to not be ashamed of erectile dysfunction, whether it's giving voice to infertility and that journey for a couple, going to where your audience is and collaborating with influencers that share your common mission are great places to collaborate and get your voice, which is an evidence base, which it comes with a bigger badge of seal of truth and respectability. And even if they're not in healthcare, if they are credible, then I think we should have no shame in collaborating with these types of accounts, with these types of influencers. Next slide, please. And we can see this in examples. You could do this by sharing space on a live. There's multiple avenues to do a live. A live allows a really authentic discussion that isn't necessarily planned out with a presentation and script, but just kind of a conversation, and it allows audience participation by means of a Q&A and an ongoing chat. And almost every platform nowadays has a live. Instagram has a live, Facebook has a live, TikTok has a live, even Twitter, I believe, has a live outlet. And so that's a great way. And why do people, I just want to, before I continue, I want us to think about, why do people like influencers? Why are we so influenced by them? Well, one of the big reason why is we want to listen to people who come off authentic, who come off relatable, who that feels like they are speaking our language, that they are kind of giving voice to our pain. And so this is why influencers have such an impactful role in our day-to-day behaviors, because a lot of them come off very relatable and consistently show up for their audience. And that is not only just in creating content, but in engaging in the audience, in responding to comments, into allowing questions to come on your platform and answering them, and then just showing a bit of your personality. This was a Truth About Vagina Size. This was a YouTube collaboration that I did with a non-healthcare professional who has a big platform on YouTube, and just kind of we talk about penis size and then talking about vagina size. There's a lot of misogyny in vagina size as well. And then in podcasts too. I mean, a lot of us have so much education and experience to bring to the table, and there's a plethora of podcasts. This was a great podcast that I was had the pleasure of being a guest on, Ologies. It's a really fun, nerdy, jam-packed podcast that looks at the study of just about anything you can think of. Next slide, please. And part of doing this collaboration is addressing misinformation during this, debunking the misinformation. Because we know that a large part of social media consumers trust information shared by influencers, collaborating with these influencers and then being that voice of debunking some misinformation, as I did in that vaginal size YouTube collaboration, can be extremely positive in moving the space forward in a good direction, and getting rid of and decreasing the anxiety and the stress and stigma and misogyny that can come with a lot of the stuff that we talk about. And at least in the United States and probably worldwide, one of the top platforms, if you're considering, is YouTube. YouTube is king for young and for older audiences. Older generations. That's a great place to start if you're thinking about, where do I start? Also, platforms like Instagram and TikTok are also quite popular worldwide. Next slide, please. Now, what will eventually happen, and this we can all probably speak and share our stories, is you're bound to get a troll. You're bound to ruffle some feathers. You're bound to get that. And I just want to share a couple examples. So there is a famous non-healthcare clitoris warrior, if you will. This woman, she had a botched labiaplasty, and then she is on a mission to educate the public on the clitoris and highlight how little medicine and doctors really pay attention to the clitoris, which actually is a good message, but I got on the wrong side of this individual because I didn't agree completely with something. And this individual started splattering my name all over her page and how I wasn't a credible position and this, that, and the other. And the best thing, and sometimes a lot of times the best thing to do is to ignore. And I refused to repeat her name on my space and keep it moving. There was a time that there was somebody who would comment on all my posts and would say that it's sexist for men patients to have to see me since I'm a woman and this, that, and the other. And you just ignore. And so don't try to avoid engaging these trolls. Sometimes they eat off of the attention that they're getting. And it may come from, like Dr. Lay pointed out, anti-masturbators, anti-circumcisers, anti-porn, anti-IVFers, and reproductive methods. We are definitely in a space in medicine that unfortunately is controversial within our larger, global audience. Next slide. So my take-home messages are social media is influencing the healthcare decisions of our patients. If you don't think that that's happening, you are wrong. It is actively happening. Misinformation or lack of information, particularly within sexual media medicine, is abundant. And so it is prudent for us to take up space in social media. We can do that by using collaboration with healthcare and other physician accounts and non-healthcare accounts. And do this for the public's advantage, okay? Disseminating science and our experience. And by doing this, again, this serves the public by debunking and misinformation that does a disservice to them. So thank you. That is all that I would like to contribute to this evening, and look forward to this Q&A session.
Thank you, Dr. Muhels. It was a really excellent talk, and I think it gets the three talks together and bring us some point of view to discuss here. And I remember everybody, we have this Q&A answer button here in the Zoom down here, so you can send some message for us. And we have a bunch of here. It's not addressed for anybody, but I think anyone who can answer this. Eleonora's tell us that there's so much limitation for professional and sexual health information to come through, and what can be done to sensibilize and open the responsibles of social media, and in a reality allow the positive side of sex instead of letting other kind of harmful sexual related info. I guess that all of three you said something about this, but if somebody can help us with such a little, David, maybe about suggesting something we can do as a group, as health professionals, something like that. David, want to say something?
One of the things I encourage folks to do is to explore new forms of media. What we've seen, certainly companies like Facebook, Twitter, etc., as they become larger and more powerful and more corporate, they become more socially and sexually conservative. So I encourage folks to get into some of the new social media platforms where they can build an audience, because they're one of the first people in there talking about these issues. Get the accurate information out there early and build a foundation and a platform, knowing that down the road, if this social media app becomes more popular, that the conservatism will creep in.
Dr. Lay, you have any examples right now? Sorry, and then we'll keep the discussion going, because this is But do you have any examples of any new, up and coming areas that are not the
yeah,
typical Instagram, Twitter, X?
Sure. Blue Sky and Mastodon are two of the alternatives that I'm hearing folks talk about.
Okay.
One of my colleagues, Zhana Vrengelova, a few years ago, she tried to do this with a what was it? It was an app called, I think, Telescope, and it was like these short videos. And she tried to do it there, but unfortunately that platform went down. She's now on TikTok doing similar stuff and getting a big following and influence. There's a new app every day. There's also I'll see if I can find the name of it. There's a social media app that is all audio that is actually really, really friendly to sexual health and alternative sexual information. I'll find that and come back to it.
Thank you. Dr. Mailhouse, you were saying?
I have nothing constructive to add because this is but I just want to vent. This is extremely frustrating. And I will scroll through X and Instagram and even TikTok and find like almost nude pictures and images. But I have a I used a stuffed penis. It was like a cute little stuffed penis, completely got in Instagram jail. You cannot type the word penis out, forget it.
Yeah.
Not even clitoris, forget it. You have to like really do some roundabout ways to talk about anatomic body parts and not get suppressed. And so I'm just here vent, sorry.
No,
But keep
I
trying.
think this is still perfectly appropriate, and it's it highlights one of the challenges that as organizations get larger, more corporate, and there's all these rules. I don't know that anyone has figured out, one of the other aspects of that question is ISSM, is SMSNA, is there any way to engage? And I don't know that we have figured that out, or that anyone has figured that out. Potentially of these avenues of, collaborating with influencers and getting some more attention out there lead to people, connecting or working with folks that are on the inside, that are helping generate the algorithms and the guidelines, et cetera. That would be really interesting to see if it was something that,
Juan,
could be influenced, but.
I will say, and I think one of the early presenter introduction folks identified this. COVID changed everything for all of us and put us online in these kind of platforms and interactions in a brand new way. And I think it is driving more groups into this kind of interaction. I've seen more sexual health groups, planning hashtags and encouraging attendees and participants to live tweet, to comment on Instagram and Facebook about the content and the material. I think the more groups engage with that, the better. I did find the app. It's called Mon, M-O-N. It is very affirmative. They do shut down hate speech, but a number of my colleagues and sex educators are on there, spreading good information accurately and affirmatively. The other thing I was going to comment on earlier that I would just circle back to, and that is that we do have to be careful to not give the impression that people we talk to or give information to on social media are our patients, because that's how then we end up with complaints or accusations. So we have to be very careful and clear when we're in those spaces that we are providing de-identified, aggregate, general information. This is not medical advice. And we need our license boards and regulatory authorities to understand and recognize that and value us being out there giving that accurate information.
Yeah. Sonia, wanna give us some thoughts about that?
Yes, I think the big point here, or what I try to do, I think collaboration is key, because you can't really look at vanity metrics for how you're growing your social media, so it's really easy to get caught up in likes and followers, but ultimately that doesn't mean that your message is not being heard. But when you collaborate and people share your posts, they share your stories because you're working together, then you are getting your message across to more people. Because I think even by the time big groups like SMSNA SMSNA and ISSM are able to get involved, you know, technology is just progressing forward at a rapid rate that makes it so difficult to do that. So using some of these like little roundabout ways of doing it can be helpful. And I know that they've definitely helped me in terms of growing.
I think this is a good idea. We share the news about spreading the all knowledge about our colleagues, our peers. So I think it's a good idea. Once to have to occupy the slots that there are people misleading and notice. I remember AUA 2022, I saw a poster about YouTube testosterone videos, and then 16% were misleading notice, and that is all wrong about it. And only 15 of them are doctors, and all of them are no practitioners. So we have to occupy these places. And there's a question here for from Omar, and he presentations and thank you all, but he's asking about YouTube being one of the most largest outlets for surgical education. Does it help doctors or are too much info, or does it help patients? What do you think about YouTube? You want
I
to
think
say
it's great. So, I mean, I think so. I have gone to YouTube to look at the steps of a certain procedure that, ooh, it's been so many years since I've done that, or, you know, and so I think it's a very valuable tool um for trainees, for us, and you know, for our patients. We can use YouTube to put out things that we say all day long to all the patients, like, oh, I'm always saying the same thing. You can start to make a YouTube video about it and then say, okay, here, go to my YouTube video and this will prepare you for the procedure. Or this is my, you know, I did a YouTube video about how to give yourself testosterone because it's like, okay, all these, you know, when I start patients on testosterone injections, they're always kind of like, well, what do I do? How do I draw it up? And so I was like, let's just make a YouTube video about it. And now I'm just going to refer them to that. And so I think that this is where we can use something like this very much to our advantage in practice.
I agree. I think overwhelmingly it is probably a good thing. I will say that, you know, the last portion of that, Dr. Rahim, I've definitely seen already, and it doesn't help that I have a young looking face, but I've had folks come in and say, you know, oh, well, you know, the video I saw last week, they did it X, Y, and Z way. Is that how you're going to do it? And sometimes that can be a little bit challenging conversation of like, well, there's multiple ways to do surgeries and approach surgeries, and for each surgeon, they have to do it in the way that they're most comfortable and they know what outcomes to expect, et cetera. So I do think from the patient side, you can sometimes potentially could err on the side of having too much information. And then if they're kind of coming in saying, well, I want you to do it this certain way, even though it's not the way you've been trained on, practicing on, et cetera, if someone felt pressure to do that, that could potentially, you know, be a little bit of a negative interaction.
I do encourage us with YouTube to identify and report inaccurate information. I think the more that we as professionals with education and training, licenses and background call out the frauds, the fakes, the liars, the more we can flood the zone with accurate information. There's a YouTube video that, you know, has millions of views about, you know, the pornography addiction and anti-masturbation, and the presenter, who's now passed away, claimed to be a doctor and a professor and, you know, an expert, and we identified that he had a high school degree. He had no training or education in any of this, that much of the information he was spouting was complete pseudoscience. And eventually YouTube actually put a disclaimer on his videos saying that the information is not accurate science. And I think those kinds of actions and messages do build up so that we can encourage and promote the value of accuracy and scientific literacy.
Yeah. And we have to have the concern about what words we're using, because we have teenagers and we have young people and we have old people, and we want to have the right words to use. Yeah. Sonia, what do you think about YouTube?
No, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in the sense that social media, whether YouTube, Instagram, whatever, can be an echo chamber. So essentially, it can really connect you with just people saying the same thing over and over and over again. And so that's really where this mob mentality comes into play. And people are like, okay, you're either fully supportive or you're on the other side. But ultimately, that makes it really hard to grow, like even as like an educator, as a human, because you're just filling the void of this echo chamber and just saying the same thing over and over again. So I think that's one of the hard parts of social media, because these algorithms are absolutely like, that we don't know how they work really.
So I think our audience wants some tips and tricks, and I know Fennel has a bunch of followers in Instagram and Sonia also. But how do you think about using sense of humor when you are talking about sexual medicine? Do you think it helps? Do you think it not helps? What's your thoughts about this?
I think it helps. I mean, I don't see it needs to be done appropriately, right? And it needs to be not laughing at the patient or the sufferer, but making a kind of awkward scenario feel a little, just less uptight. I have used myself as the butt of the joke, if you will, in talking about certain things related to down there and sexual health. And it is by and large very well received, and people feel more comfortable coming forward and talking about it. I've had patients multiple times. My patients tell me, I really like how you come across on, Instagram or whatever. And I felt like I feel more comfortable talking to you here in the office because of that.
I do encourage folks, just like Dr. Milhouse said, talk to your patients about your online presence. And I tell all my patients, I have a significant online presence. I will never talk about you online. I'll never talk about you in the media. If there's ever a time when I'm talking about something and you think I'm talking about you, please feel free to come and ask me. If you ever have a concern about something that you see that I say online, please come, open door, let's talk about it. It's really important to do that, because otherwise you end up with these misunderstandings. In terms of being funny, I think I'm funny. Not everybody else thinks I'm hilarious as I do, but I have had in court people throw down social media comments that I have made, and on the stand I had to explain, oh, I was making a joke. And luckily the jury usually understands it, but the attorneys can use it against you. So just know, you say something, it's out there.
I think kind of like Dr. Milhouse said before, it's all about being authentic. If you are funny and you add humor to some of what you're posting in a classy kind of way, I think it's great. I'm not so funny, so I don't use humor a ton, but I think for people that are, it is a great tool to just connect authentically with other people.
I love it.
Nice.
And Dr. Balani, I'm gonna share this additional question in the Q&A to follow up on that. So Dr. Rahim again asks, what are your thoughts on the restricted access to social media as it pertains to sexual medicine? In some parts of the world, how does that impact patient-doctor education? And I think from the three talks from all of you kind of highlighted that it may be even more restricted than we realize in all parts of the world, but how do we take into account, kind of those regional differences since ISSM is such a global audience?
I mean, I think it sucks. I think it's unfortunate that, there are so many restrictions, and that's really why it's important to note these different restrictions and how they occur with the government or technology in general. Oftentimes, kind of discussing sexual health in the context of family health or community health sometimes resonates a little bit better, and oftentimes you're able to forego some of these barriers, but it's definitely a significant challenge, I think, to anyone all over the place, but specifically to certain places that are regulated by government regulations.
Certainly. So I have a little question here because Dr. Milhouse said something about we ignore the haters or something like that. But I can think the contrary, just to make a counterpoint here. And we can ask it with research, with science, and make the counterpoint about that. What are your thoughts about that? We make the all opinions here. Dave, they want to say something about it?
Uh, the first time I was getting canceled, I think we're on 4 or 5 times now. I reached out to Dan Savage, who's, a friend and a colleague, and I said, what do I do here? And Dan gave me some of the best advice. He said, block, delete, report. And he said, move on, put out new content, put out new information, and keep going forward. Don't let these folks drag you down or slow you down. All that said, I will say it is painful when there are people attacking you online, doxing you. I've had I've had to have security at some staff at some of my presentations because of online death threats and such. So this stuff is challenging. Talking about sexual health and saying that sex is not scary to people who are terrified of sex is a very threatening message. And they can respond with vitriol, anger, and dangerous rhetoric. So don't ignore it, but don't let it own you.
I think I do something like that.
I say generally ignore and block if you need to. I have a hard stop. Like if you are offensive to either me or in the comments, I monitor my comments, and if people are or offensive, I will block I will delete their comment and I will block them. If you can disagree with me all you want, that's fine. I won't block or delete that, right? But if you become offensive or threatening, easy decision. I have a time or two been used a trolls comment or whatever, and been like, let me highlight the ways this is wrong, as another, and point out the inaccuracies for more education for everybody else who's listening to me. So I think if you have the energy to and can back it up, then you do bring up a valid point, Dr. Lopes. So point.
Yeah, I think, as we start to wrap up the webinar tonight, I think one of the things that these last few comments made me think of is one of the things that I've always struggled with and worry about when to comment, get involved, etc. Is this kind of fear of that if somebody already has a very emotional attachment to their idea, like the semen retention, no fab, etc. It's like, do I even engage and try to provide data or highlight lack of data? Because, especially online with the anonymity there, that the response is usually just, get people to target, attack. And for most of the time for me, it's like, I do not have the energy to engage with that. But it is great that there are people, like the three of you who have the platforms, have the kind of experience, have built this up over time to think about ways to highlight, and even, Dr. Milhouse, pick out an example and say, let me highlight how this is wrong for everybody else who hasn't really fallen into that kind of mob mentality per se. And so potentially protecting some folks from going down that, dark rabbit hole. So that's fantastic. Another thing that I struggle with, just as a final comment, and see if you folks have any resources that our listeners here, in the US and other regions may be able to offer to their own patients in the clinic. It sometimes can be very hard for patients to access a sex therapist, a clinical psychologist, somebody who really has expertise both in the mental health realm as well as sexual medicine. With COVID, so much of what we do has turned to social media online. Are there certain podcasts, YouTube channels, for the folks who say, look, my insurance doesn't cover it, I can't get a hold of anyone, it's too expensive. is there a collated list of resources? And if there isn't, do we need to work with ISSM and SMSNA to put that together? Because I imagine there's stuff out there that I just have no idea about that my patients could benefit from.
Because this field evolves so quickly and is moving so quickly, things change, podcasts come and go. It is tough. I do a lot of training and partnership with a group. I'm on the board of directors called the Sexual Health Alliance. They do curate a growing list of online resources, including podcast and videos that they recommend to folks that come there for trainings. That would be one of the first places I would go.
I mean,
Great, thank you.
yeah.
Go ahead, Dr.
I think
Villani.
it's a great idea if SMSNA and ISSM had a list, because I will often refer to societies, especially depending on where people are, because I think it is some of the most factual information that they can get to people close to them, at least as a start, because people will contact my office and say, do you know anyone in wherever? So, I mean, I think that's a great idea moving forward, definitely an action item that would be good to complete.
And then just adding to that, I think taking time out to find your local sex therapist, and then speaking to them and just saying, hey, what are resources that you gravitate to, that you encourage patients to do, or whatnot. There are I don't know podcasts per se, but there are a number of books that can be very helpful for patients. Come As You Are, Better Sex Through Mindfulness are some examples. So I think we in the sexual medicine space can take out a little bit of time to really get to know our fellow sex therapists that are nearby, and then utilize the avenues and resources that they give patients to empower our patients.
I love that.
Fantastic. And I guess Michael Perman says here that the mental health committee of SMSNA are developing something about this, and it's not yet available yet, but soon probably planned at this time.
Oh,
Message.
Dr.
I think we
Lopes.
have to claim for other people, other peers that are not come together with us, yeah, because we have to stimulate more people with engaging resources, if we engage in research, and maybe our peers may be more intuitive here, because we have Twitter now X, we have LinkedIn, we have so many platforms that can be used at so many different things, so many different ways, and we have to be engaged all the community about this. So I think it's a good thought we have to think. So to get to the ends, I don't know if you have to do something about it,
Dr. Lopez, I
and
was just gonna
some final messages.
Yeah, there was a comment we didn't, or a question we didn't mention, and it was participant asking about social media for children and whether restrictions should be encouraged, etc. on there to prevent possible harms. I get it, and I understand that thinking and those questions. I think they're very reasonable. I believe that this works best with parents having live conversations with their children and young people about social media. I think we can inoculate and vaccinate people from the harms of social media by creating an open door conversation where they can ask questions. The people that we researched on NoFap, for instance, the dangerous ones, the ones that are suffering harm, are isolated there. They're isolated from the rest of the world. So I think rather than trying to restrict social media, I think what we can do best is open the door so that people that are getting information on social media can talk to us in real life and cure some of those dangerous ills and myths, rather than trying to, I don't think we can close Pandora's box with social media. I think what we need to do is connect people to the world and to other people.
It's all
Well, it'd
about
be
that
hard to,
connections, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of hard to beat that as a closing statement from this group and this panel. I'm Juan Andino. It's been a pleasure, being with all of you tonight. Dr. Lopes, my co-moderator, Dr. Mehlhaus, Dr. Balani, Dr. Lay, really thank you for your time, for expertise, and what you've been doing in this area and really disseminating information about sexual medicine, the good side, even though the algorithm is trying to hide it. As we wrapped up those questions, there's still a lot of work to be done. Are there things that we can be doing as individuals, as organizations, to help better disseminate this type of information? How can we collate resources? How can we do this, live? The world of social media, the online presence is constantly changing. It's hard to even keep up. Even society organization websites, it's hard for them to be constantly updated. So a lot of work to be done. I think, the connecting people and collaborating seems to be two key themes that kept popping up here. With that, thank you all for joining from all over the world, different time zones, for your attention tonight. And this webinar will be available on the ISSM and SMSNA websites in the future. Good night, everyone, or good morning, depending on
sounds
where you
good.
are.
Bye, everybody.